Welcome back to Two Keto Dudes. This is Carl Franklin from Connecticut in the United States. And in February 2016, I put myself on a ketogenic diet to take control of my metabolism. In just 2.5 months, I managed to reverse all my markers of type 2 diabetes with diet alone. As of now, I'm 80 pounds lighter with no signs of diabetes or heart disease.
Hi, I'm Richard Morris in Canberra, Australia. I've been on a ketogenic diet since April of 2014. When I started, I was very sick with complications from type 2 diabetes. Within 6 months of starting a ketogenic diet, all of my biomarkers of disease had disappeared. I've lost about 100 pounds and I've completely turned my health around.
And this show is a document of my progress through ketosis and Richard's experience thriving for years in ketosis.
Thriving!
And hopefully that might help a few people who are curious about this kind of dietary hacking.
Yeah, we're not doctors. We don't want to give anyone any medical advice, but we are keen to share our own experiences. We're actually both software developers, so we're not afraid of a little technical detail, are we, Carl?
No.
We've done some research into our own deranged metabolisms and the science behind them. We hope to share some of that research. Where possible, we intend to put links to the show notes to cite research supporting any claims that we make.
You'll probably work out pretty quickly that we're both foodies.
We sure are.
We love to cook and we love to eat.
Mm-hmm.
In every episode, we both share a keto recipe that, can't be ignored.
Cannot be ignored.
All right, so let's start podcast number 102. Zoe Rocks, Part 2.
Heard you say you're due for a little.
So,
Richard, do we have any apologies or corrections from last week's show?
That was Zoe Rocks Part 1. No, I think Zoe did a really good job. Actually, we do have one errata point. This was something where you and I stuffed up.
Yep, we did.
Zoe didn't make any mistakes, but we really screwed the pooch. So basically what happened was we have a segment in our podcast called Mail. You've probably heard of it, where we read out mail from our contributors. And I read a story out from the ketogenic forums from a gentleman named Bob Johnson, who gave us a wonderful review of his experience with the VA and thanked us for the show. And so, that was a great story to show on Mail. And then Carl read out an iTunes review from a guy who had a very similar story. And of course, afterwards, I said,
fascinated that the stories were so similar.
Yeah. See how many times we hear the same information?
It was the same guy.
All over the place. It's the same guy. He got in touch with us afterwards and said, dudes, I need to get a lottery ticket because you called me out twice in the same show. So that's our errata. We'll try and choose two different people next time.
Yeah. So let's revisit what a ketogenic diet is. It's any diet where you're burning fat for fuel, and a byproduct of that fat burning is ketone bodies. These ketone bodies provide fuel for your brain and for your muscles and for all sorts of things. So we're powered by fat. Now, to get into ketosis, one sure way to do it is to eat less than 20 grams of carbohydrates per day.
Yeah, no sugar, no starch.
No sugar, no starch. And replace all that sugar and starch with fat.
Yeah.
The protein should be about the same, which is moderate. We should eat moderate amounts of protein. And for us, that's 1 to 1.5 grams of protein per every kilogram of lean body mass we have.
Yep.
That's it.
That's a ketogenic diet.
That's a ketogenic diet right there. Bacon and eggs.
Bacon and eggs.
Yeah. So, Richard, how was your week?
It was pretty good. I'm still seeing ketones out the wazoo. My ketones this morning were 1.8, which is just outrageous for me. Normally, my physiological range, as everybody probably knows, is 0.2 to 0.8. I rarely go over that unless I go to altitude, like going up to Breckenridge, or unless I really, really push my body hard. But I suspect there's a couple of things that probably changed. One of the things, I had a dental implant done this week, and so in advance of that, I wanted to be really good at making collagen because I had the tooth extraction was done in December, and then the bone of my jaw needed to set and become strong enough to be able to hold this titanium implant. And so bone is made up of protein and minerals. It's the protein is predominantly collagen. And so I wanted to be really good at making collagen. So I've been eating a lot of collagen in the form of pork belly, which is skin has a lot of collagen, bone has a lot of collagen. So I've been eating a lot of bone broth as well. But lately, over the past probably 3 or 4 weeks, I've been supplementing with a amino acid called glycine, which comprises 30% of collagen. The protein collagen is made up of a whole bunch of amino acids.
Yeah, you talked about this last week.
Yeah, so I've been supplementing with this glycine. I've been using it in my coffee as a sweetener because it's slightly sweet. And that happened about the same time as my ketones started rising. So that's probably the most likely candidate, and I don't really understand the biochemistry of why that would be, but I'm looking into it.
That's
but a couple of other things that I've changed as well. I did increase my metformin a couple of months ago, and I did start adding creatine about 3 or 4 months ago as well. So these are things that might be a change, but the change that happened about the same time as the ketones all started improving was this glycine. So that's the most likely candidate. And I've been losing a lot of weight since then as well, and part of the reason for that is likely because my insulin is lower. Now, I did a blood test. I mentioned last week I was doing a blood test, and I got the results back.
All right.
And my fasting insulin is 3 milli-IU per litre lower than it was last time. So
that is so awesome.
My insulin is definitely coming down, and so that's likely the mechanism. Why glycine is affecting my insulin, I don't know, but that's likely part of the process. So that was kind of my week. And the other thing is, I'm in the process of buying a house. We saw a house this weekend that we think we're going to make an offer on. So that's all very exciting. Yeah,
that's great.
So
You've had a great week.
Yeah, it's a good week. So, but I've also been on hillbilly heroin for this dental implant, which is opiates because I've had this titanium screw put into my upper jaw up around my first molar. So so a little bit of pain, but other than that, it's been a good week. How was your week, Carl?
My week was great. I got a new chin strap for use with my CPAP machine. And I have sleep apnea. I've had it for a long time, actually, since about 2002, I think. But now this chin straps never worked for me because they were always the ones that sort of attached to the straps on the mask with Velcro, and they'd always come off. But this one is just one piece, and it fits over your head and just holds your mouth shut. It's made by a company called Rashify, Raschify. And I got it on Amazon. So for anybody who has apnea and can't wear a chin strap for the same reason and you want to, I'm just going to put the link out there. But I love it. I've been getting more sleep. I've been sleeping better. Don't wake up with a dry mouth or anything like that. So, yeah. I like it.
We're not being paid by Rashify to advertise their products. So,
no, it's just,
Rashify, if you're listening to this podcast,
that's right.
Get in touch with us.
Sure. Well, the thing is that every once in a while I just come across something that is so simple and so effective, and it just speaks to good design, right? I mean, this is just a piece of cloth with some holes for your ears, and it just goes over your head and holds your mouth shut. It's not that hard.
That's awesome. So what does a CPAP do?
So a CPAP forces air down your throat to keep your air pathways open, so it stops you from snoring, and it also prevents you from stopping breathing, which is what apnea does. Right. And apnea is very dangerous if you don't get it treated. If you're waking up in the morning and you feel like you're not getting any rest and you feel like you're out of breath, maybe a little dizzy, tired, lethargic, that's because your muscles and your blood, there's not enough oxygen in there. And it's because you're stopping breathing. When I did my sleep test, I had stopped breathing for 30, 40 seconds.
Wow.
At a time. You don't get any sleep because your autonomic system sort of kicks in and wakes you up. Right. And enough so that you can breathe again. Your brain's like, hey, you got to breathe.
Yeah, wake up, buddy.
Yeah. And so the end result is you just don't get any good sleep, and also raises your blood pressure, and You know, the doctor, when I was first diagnosed, said, I'll be honest with you, you know, if you don't treat this one way or another, you're going to die an early death, and it's not going to be fun.
Right, yeah.
So,
wow, that is fascinating, yeah.
That's it. It was a great week. I'm getting a lot of sleep, finally able to sleep on my back, and having a good time.
Outstanding.
That's it. So I feel like giving away a mug.
Yeah. So who we got? We got a winner?
Yeah, let's give away a mug to a randomly chosen member of the Two Keto Dudes fan club. And if you don't know what that is, go to fanclub.2keto.com and answer a few questions and then join. And every show we like to give away stuff. Yeah. And right now we're on a mug kick. We're giving away Keep Calm and Keto on mugs with our mugs on them. So today's winner is Jim O'Brien.
Well done, Jim.
Well
Congratulations.
Done. Way to get picked at random, Jim.
Yeah. And if you don't want to wait to win a mug, you can always buy one at gear.2keto.com and pick yourself up a onesie or a t-shirt while you're at it.
Absolutely. And that brings us to a little segment we call...
Oh, we're getting good at that. We're pros at the mail.
Oh, we are. Yeah.
Well, we went last week. Let's try and do better this week.
Yeah, we're going to up our game, kids.
Here we are. So I've got one from Francis on Facebook, and Francis says, after being diagnosed with stage 1 lymphoma, I discovered the ketogenic diet. My doctor has taken a watch and wait approach, but he has supported my diet experiment. It's been a year, and the tumour has actually shrunk a bit. I'm 63 and 5'2", and I went from 133 pounds to 108 really quickly. Because I'm on my diet, my husband is as well, but he's not as strict as I am. He went from 183 to 170. And he was able to get off his blood pressure meds, but anyway, he recently flunked his stress test. He had an angiogram, and then he was told that he needed a quadruple bypass.
Wow.
We were in shock. Anyway, he had it on Thursday, and he's doing really well. The surgeon put him on a diabetic diet, not because of his blood sugar. It was only 84 when he got here for surgery, which is not too bad. Yeah. She goes on and says he was put on the diabetic diet because the doctor said that sugar feeds infection. Huh. And I was stunned and pleased. However, I'm really shocked at their idea of a diabetic diet. For example, there is a drink that they give them called Diabetes Shield, which is a nutritional drink that contains 30 grams of carbohydrates and, of course, no fat.
Oh, come on.
His meals always included bread and potatoes, rice, grits, and pancakes.
What?
They did give him a sugar-free syrup and sugar-free Jell-O and Sweet and Low for sweetener. Look, I can't wait to get him home and back onto real food and keto.
People just don't understand what sugar is. They don't get it.
Yeah, they don't get the fact that starch is just a structure full of sugars.
It doesn't taste sweet, therefore that must be okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, they're feeding him lots of sugar in the pancakes and the grits, potato, bread, rice. And I've run into this experience with hospital dietitians before. Julie had a surgery done a couple of years ago. We'd just been keto maybe for 6 months or so.
Yeah.
And she had a surgery done on her sinuses. And we chose hospitals based on the fact that they were willing to do a ketogenic diet. So we have private health cover. We can choose any hospital, any doctor that we want in the region. We could have gone to Sydney if we wanted to. But we interviewed all of the hospitals in Canberra, and at every interview we said, can you do a ketogenic diet for the patient? And one of the hospitals, it was one of the Catholic hospitals, said, yep, we can absolutely do a ketogenic diet. It's not a problem. We have a hospital dietitian on standby who is capable of doing that. And so we said, fine, we'll go with you guys. And because she had private health care, she had like a 5-day recovery in hospital. We knew that she'd be totally keto for the whole thing. And so we're all happy, right? So anyway, she has the operation, and we told the anaesthetist that she's been ketogenic for 6 months, and so she was glucose sparing, and so if he was to push glucose during the procedure, he needed to be aware of that because her body, the dynamics of how she uses energy was slightly different from regular people, so he needed to be aware of that.
Yep.
But so the procedure went perfectly fine. And I went to go up to see her after the operation. She was already post-op and she was in the room, and they wouldn't let me in. And I said, why won't you let me in? And they said, because she's not eating her food. She's refusing to eat her food.
Wow.
I said, what food are you giving her? And they said, well, this is the standard post-surgery recovery that every patient has to have, which is orange juice and a sandwich. And she had a male nurse standing over her, insisting that she eat before she was allowed any visitors.
That is insane.
And so I remained entirely calm. I kept calm and I ketoed on. I said, can I speak to the dietitian? And they said, sure, and down on the 3rd floor. So I went down 2 floors to the dietitian, and I said, tell me about this patient you've got. You know, what diet are you giving her? She said, nothing, standard diet. I said, well, we requested the ketogenic diet, and the dietitian says, I refuse to put anyone on a ketogenic diet unless they're an epileptic child under instructions for a ketogenic diet from their doctor.
Wow.
I said to her, we chose this hospital based on the fact that admission said that they would be willing to do a ketogenic diet. And she said, no, I'm the final arbiter on that. And I'm not going to put her on a ketogenic diet until a doctor tells me that I have to. So anyway, she had to drink the orange juice and eat the white bread sandwich. And the food that they gave her, the meals were absolutely horrid. There was this starchy gravy that was on all of the meats, which was just, you know, it was just corn flour and water and a little bit of stock. And the meat was the cheapest possible meat. It was lean, but it was grey.
That's terrible.
Buggery. The vegetables, none of the vegetables had any fat on them at all. No butter. You were able to get margarine. You were able to get low-fat yogurt. There was skim milk. And also, she was able to get sugar-free Jell-O was an option, but it included fruit. So sugar-free Jell-O with fruit is kind of pointless, really. So it's fruit embedded in the jelly.
Yeah.
So I ended up smuggling a couple of brie and a salami for her.
That's great.
She had 5 days of recovery there. She lasted 2 days before she said, get me the hell out of this crazy joint. So, Francis, look, I really feel for you. Hospital diets are horrible, and yeah. We need to change that.
Yeah. Well, good story, Richard. Even though
so what's
it was a little sad, but
sorry.
It made me angry. Now I'm all angry. So I have another podcast review from Apple Podcast Reviews. What we used to call iTunes. It's not Francis.
Good.
No, it's not. This one is from Denise Langler. And she says, a few years ago, a doctor recommended that my husband and I try a keto diet. So, there are doctors out there. I'm just kidding. I'm all worked up now. We had our doubts about how this would work for us as we both compete in Ironman triathlons.
Wow.
We were very pleasantly surprised. Although we train every day, we started to lose weight and it just kept coming off. We're both in our 60s and had the normal aches and pains around our joints that you accept with aging. All aches and pains disappeared.
Right.
We were able to do some very long training sessions and back it up day after day after day without needing a rest, and had endless amounts of energy during training. But one of the most amazing things we discovered was that we were able to complete our Ironman race using only water. Our whole race, which is usually 13 to 15 hours, was fueled on body fat. Other competitors were relying on carbs, sugary gels, and drinks for energy continually throughout the race. We needed nothing other than water. We took some time off racing and slid backwards a bit, consuming some carbs. The aches and pains returned, and we don't feel anywhere near as fit and healthy as when we stuck to the keto diet. People would always ask us, what do you eat? And thought it would be very difficult to maintain. But like anything that's worth doing, it becomes part of your lifestyle, and the results speak for themselves. Back to keto we go.
Nice.
How cool is that?
That's awesome. There's a triathlete couple living up in Caloundra in Australia who've gone keto and listens to the show.
That might be them. They are from Australia.
Well, Ironman is a common term in Australia. I know there's the Hawaiian Ironman, which is this big event in America, but we have Ironman races sort of like every weekend here, so it's a more common thing. But we should have her on the show sometime to talk about that, because that is a fascinating story.
Great story. All right, and that brings us to our interview, part 2 with Zoe Harcombe, which was recorded at her home in Cardiff, Wales.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a very nice time, very nice chat last week. We continue it this week, and let's just roll that recording now.
Heard you say you're due for a little.
So we're back for part 2 of our talk with Zoe Harcombe. I am actually in Zoe's house in Wales, and with her husband Andy, who picked me up at the train station, and her pets, which you may have heard in the last one. The dog has a little moaning.
Oh, I love her. She's having chemo at the moment. We discovered lymphoma in August of last year. And
lovely
she was
dog, though.
Really healthy. So, the vet said chemo for pets is very different to chemo for humans. I think chemo for humans is trying to keep you alive as long as possible. That's not the objective with pets. It's to try and, alleviate any discomfort and make your life as good as possible. So we thought we would go for that. And she's doing great, but she does groan every now and again. So apologies in advance.
If you're wondering what that was, and she eats really well, doesn't she?
Yeah, she's, it's very interesting actually for anyone who has to take steroids for various conditions, because she has steroid tablets with the chemo, as humans do. And steroids tend to make you very hungry. They also tend to play havoc with your blood glucose levels. A type 1, I know, has to take steroids for something at the moment and hasn't had to in the past. And he has found his blood glucose levels going up to crazy things like 25.
Prednisone is a synthetic cortisol steroid, right? So that would raise your insulin levels and therefore your
glucose.
Yeah. There's definitely a direct and immediate impact and a significant impact on blood glucose levels.
Glucose, yeah. So let's talk about the Pure study that came out last year. This was something we talked about a little bit on Two Keto Dudes.
We did.
Yeah. But what was your take on it?
Okay, so I often look at studies. Every week I'll take a study from a journal and take a look at the study. And as with any epidemiological study, you've got the usual problems of you can observe an association, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a causation. You might find that people eat pizza and wear red socks. It doesn't mean that, eating pizza causes you to wear red socks, or even wearing red socks causes you to eat pizza.
One of my favorites, and I think the Freakonomics guys did this, They found all these crazy correlations that were obviously ridiculous, but one of them was eating ice cream causes drowning.
Yeah, because of course, actually that's an interesting one, because that's what we would call a confounder.
Yeah.
So the confounder, of course, is good weather.
Right. In summertime.
So in the summertime, you'll eat ice cream and you'll go swimming.
That's right.
But going swimming doesn't necessarily cause you to eat ice cream.
Right.
But hot weather causes both.
So they claim, you're more likely to drown if you eat ice cream.
Yeah. No, so it's quite funny actually. So it had the usual sort of, it's association, not causation.
Right.
I think one of the highest percentages that was claimed was that mortality was 28% lower during the study period in the higher fat intake. From memory, that was one of the findings. And to be able to move from association to causation, one of the best ways to see if this can be done is to look at the famous Bradford Hill criteria set out in the 1960s. They still hold, brilliantly today. And the first one is the simplest rule of thumb test. If you're not in the territory of double,
right,
it's unlikely that A causes B. When Bradford Hill was developing the criteria, he was looking at scrotal cancer in chimney sweeps. And chimney sweeps were something like 200 times more likely to develop scrotal cancer than people who were not chimney sweeps.
Wow.
Now, that's not
Sure.
You don't then have to do a randomized controlled trial to say, is this causal? You can just straight away say, you've ticked the first criterion. And then there are another 8 criterion that Bradford Hill developed to say, if you tick all of those boxes, you've got a causal relationship. So it doesn't get off the ground in terms of causality.
The percentages that they were talking about just by observation or epidemiological studies was very low, right?
It's very low. And it's difficult to think of I can just think of one. So most of the stuff that comes out of Harvard, where you get the newspaper headlines of, eat whole grains and you're 30% less likely to, have cancer or heart disease. Or
I saw that in the London Times today.
Oh, whatever. It's another one.
Eat high fiber to lose weight.
Yeah, I mean, it's always causation rather than association, because it is in the realms of, 20%, 10% sometimes. It's pathetic. It's just so tiny. You cannot jump to causation. You're nowhere near the Bradford Hill territory. The one I did see recently, which was an epidemiological study, this came out just at the end of last year. They'd looked at people who regularly take antacids and the association with stomach cancer. And in a particular group, and I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but it was something like if you'd taken antacids daily for, may not be right, 3 years, you had something like a 7-fold increased risk of stomach cancer.
I happen to know a man who died of esophageal cancer. And was popping those purple pills every day. And I mean, I don't. That's the first time I heard of it, and then I saw that study that came out.
That is in the causal territory straight away, but not many of them are. So, back to pure association, not causation. They didn't claim causation. They wouldn't. They were good researchers. The second problem you've then got with these epidemiological studies is that the headlines are the relative risk. The absolute risk is tiny. I love looking at numbers. I got a scholarship to read maths at Cambridge. I changed to economics, but, the maths was always a part of what I do.
What's the difference between those two? Relative risk and absolute risk?
Relative risk and absolute risk. So, so what they announced in the headline is that, the 20, let's say the 28% risk. So the people who died during the study, you were 28% more likely to die during the study if you were in the lower fat group than in the higher fat group. And that sounds really impressive. And if you give that, Dr. Aseem Malhotra does a great presentation on this, where he explains that if you give that statistic, Dr. Malcolm Kendrick does the same, if you give that statistic to a bunch of doctors and say, what do you think it means? They think it means that if you've got 100 people, 28 more will die in one group than in the other.
Right.
They just anchor everything to 100 because they hear the word percent.
Right.
But when you get into the absolute numbers, you suddenly realize that they're absolutely tiny. So, I mean, probably the best way to give the example would be, if you might have a 1 in 100,000 risk of developing esophageal cancer.
Right.
And if your risk is 20% higher,
in other words, 1.28%.
You've now got a 1.2 risk in 100,000 of developing esophageal cancer. And that's the absolute risk. So the relative risk is you've got a 20% difference. The absolute risk is 1.2 versus 1 in 100,000. So the absolute risk, everything is about the denominator, what you're dividing by.
Right.
So in the PURE study, there were over 1 million person years. It was an average of something like 7 years, and they looked at 135,000 people. So they had over 1 million person years. And I worked out that the absolute risk, and I think I'm right off the top of my head, was 0.58%. In any
what?
1 year of dying.
Oh, okay.
So you can then apply that sort of 28% risk and keep the average of 0.58. And it ends up being something like your risk was either 0.62, let's say, or 0.53.
Still statistically insignificant.
Exactly. Like, do you care? If I went to you and said, okay, you've got a 1 in 200 chance of developing this, and you've got now slightly higher than a 1 in 200 or slightly lower than a 1 in 200, you're still just going to hear 1 in 200 and just think, I don't care.
Right.
You know, I've got a 1 in, 100 chance of getting run over in the next 10 years or something. I just don't care. So Malcolm Kendrick has done a blog on this quite recently. If you follow his brilliant series, What Really Causes Heart Disease, I think it's something like part number 42. It says something like, if you put statins up against exercise is something like 5,400% better for you than taking a statin, because of course, as we all know, statins bugger all use in heart disease. It's going to do far more harm than good. The very slight anti-inflammatory mechanism that it might have, because it's got nothing to do with cholesterol lowering, pales into insignificant next to don't smoke, do move, and get some sunshine. Which was the gist of his latest blog. So what the study did conclude, it basically said we need to revisit current dietary guidelines. Absolutely. I mean, 100%. You cannot disagree with that recommendation.
Right.
One of the things that I thought might be useful out of the Pure study was the fact that they found no correlation between saturated fat and cardiovascular disease. And if you find no correlation, then that means you can infer a lack of causation. So for that, the Pure study really puts the whole saturated fat trial on notice for being pointless.
Do you know, I think it was if I can get the words right, Dr. Malcolm Kendrick said, association does not prove causation, but lack of association disproves causation.
That's right.
His exact words. So yes, to that extent, it actually found quite favourably in terms of saturated fat, with the caveats of association and relative risk. But Richard, you're absolutely right. If you can't find that there's a problem, then you certainly can't go around claiming that there is a problem, because you can't find a problem. And of course, my PhD looked at the randomized controlled trial evidence against saturated fat and found similarly there is none. And I looked at the epidemiological stuff at the time, and then looked at the epidemiological stuff available now. There just isn't any. If you want to watch a half an hour video that basically is all you ever need to watch to say why there is no case against total fat and why there is no case against saturated fat, it's the presentation that I gave at Breckenridge in 2017. It's openly available on View. I think if you put Breckenridge in the search box on my site, let alone the Low Carb Down Under on YouTube, you'll find it quite easily. It's 30 minutes. And it even goes to the one remaining study that they hang on to, the Hooper-Cochrane study of 2015. And it then explains why that still doesn't provide evidence against saturated fat, even if it were the one oasis in amongst all the other many studies that find nothing. Even that, it just doesn't stack up. So
I feel like I want to dial it back a little bit for the listeners, and maybe talk just for a few minutes about the difference between what an epidemiological study is and a randomized controlled trial.
Okay.
I know an epidemiological study is one that's basically questionnaires, how, just tell us what you did or what you ate.
Food frequency questionnaires.
Yeah. So, you've got a couple of types of epidemiological studies, and they tend to either fall into prospective, what we call cohort studies, or retrospective cohort studies. So the prospective cohort studies are generally regarded as the most robust. So that's the one when, like the Nurses' Health Study or the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study or the European Prospective Investigation into Cancer, the massive studies that are going on around Europe, they gather together a population of people. It can either be a defined population like nurses or health professionals or random people in Europe who have signed up to be monitored in the EPIC study. I'm actually a member of the EPIC study, which is quite interesting.
Wow.
And I was recruited, you'll find this interesting, when I was a vegetarian. So back in the, late 90s, I think, when I was vegetarian, I got an approach through the Vegetarian Society. They were looking to make sure that they had sufficient vegetarian members, because then they could study populations within the population.
Right.
And make the study even more powerful. So we got a letter saying, would you like to sign up for this study? I thought it'd be really interesting, so I did. And basically, you get given a questionnaire at the time, and herein lies the first problem. And one of my blogs has got the questionnaire openly up online so you can see the problem, because it says, some of them say, what did you eat yesterday? Which might not be typical. Some of them say, what did you eat last week? Which you might not be able to remember. And then even worse, some of them will say, what did you eat last year?
Good Lord.
And then you have to go and see them. Google, dietary questionnaire, epidemiological study or something, or find the EPIC one, EPIC, and put it in, and it will say, do you have bacon less than once a day, more than once a day, less than once a week, never, once in a blue moon, only when it's Christmas. And then it asks you another, 500 questions like that.
Right.
Do you eat chickpeas? Do you eat chickpeas with the wrapper on, or chickpeas with, and it just goes insane.
Right.
And trust me, you get to some point in the survey when it's just like, I've lost the will. So they then follow you. So they get that data. So I didn't go in for a checkup. So I did it all. It was all self-reported.
Yeah.
So I told them my gender. I told them my weight. I told them my height. I told them any conditions that I had already diagnosed. I told them what I ate, how much I exercised. That's all they wanted to know. Did I smoke? That stuff.
Yeah.
So then I get a follow-up questionnaire. I've had 2 in the last 20 years, so probably every 10 years. Now, I'm, of course, not veggie now. So what happens if I now develop heart disease, do they say that I've developed heart disease because that's associated with my first questionnaire when I was veggie, or with my most recent questionnaire when I'm not veggie? I don't know.
Right.
But they just look to see what happens to that population over time. They get a ton of data, they chuck it into the computer, and they look for patterns.
Right.
And the patterns might be as bizarre as people who exercise also eat chickpeas.
Or people who eat ice cream are more likely to drown.
Yeah, and that's what they come up with. And Harvard have made a business out of it, because they continually quiz the nurses' health study and the health professional study. And right now, this minute, they are looking for new patterns that will come out in the media in 6 months' time. So the randomized control trial is very different. The randomized control trial takes a bunch of people and randomly allocates them to either do nothing, the control
group,
or to do something.
Right.
And that's what happened with things like the Rose corn oil trial, arguably the very first dietary fat intervention. They actually had 3 arms. So they said there's a control, there's a group of people who are going to have this diet plus corn oil, and then there's a group of people who are going to have this diet plus olive oil. And we're going to see how they do. And
the control part is they get to control the inputs, right? In other words,
the control, they're trying to keep unchanged in some ways. So you've got to have something to anchor it to. I mean, if we did a randomized control trial now and we said, right, you go on a low-carb diet and Carl is going to go on a low-carb diet and I'm going to go on a vegan diet, we've changed 3 things.
Right.
We don't know, we've got no sort of anchor.
You have to test one thing at a time, in other words.
Exactly. Yeah. So you've got to have a group that you do nothing to.
Right.
So that you can say, okay, this bunch of people went on a low-carb diet and this bunch of people carried on with the standard American diet, the Australian diet, the British diet. And it's what they did with the Lancet study just before Christmas, the one that made a lot of headlines, where they basically kept the control group on the standard advice for diabetics that exists in the UK at the moment. And then the intervention group, they put on a very, very low calorie diet, which of course also is a reasonably low carb diet because you're just not eating much of anything.
Right.
And then they concluded that the low cal, moderately low carb group effectively on average put diabetes into remission. So you can make 2 conclusions from that study. You can say a low cal intervention effectively was able to put type 2 diabetes into remission. You can also conclude our current dietary advice for diabetics is criminal.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it's not going to help.
Absolutely.
They didn't note that one, funnily enough, in the conclusion at the end.
And has there ever been a randomized control trial where after they get through the entire process and they find the results, they re-randomize the same people and go through the entire process again?
Okay, yeah, no. So the best way to do one of those, these are really powerful studies, and you see them a lot on documentaries on TV where they can't use too many people and they need to get a result for the documentary in a short period of time. So it's called a crossover trial. So what would happen is, you could probably even do it with just us three. So we could all go on a vegan diet and see what happened. And then we could cross over and go on an entirely meat diet and see what happened. And what that effectively does is it rules out the chance that we just happen to get the people in the intervention group who are going to respond well to that intervention.
Right.
So if you think of the work that Dave Feldman is doing with cholesterol and hyper responders or whatever, you didn't end up with all the Dave Feldmans in one group just by chance, because that can happen.
Right.
By random chance, that can happen. Unlikely, but it can happen. And then you do an intervention, and of course you don't get a clear result because you actually ended up with the wrong people in the wrong group.
Yeah.
So the crossovers can be really powerful because you can do them with half a dozen people. I wanted to do one. My original PhD idea was actually not looking at the dietary guidelines. It was to do what I was going to call a breakfast experiment, which was to take, maybe you could get away with as few as half a dozen or 10 people and say, okay, you guys for breakfast are going to have, let's say, 500 calories of pure carbohydrate, which is sucrose. And then you guys are going to have, you guys are going to have 500 calories of the closest we can get to with pure protein. So that might be egg whites or white fish or whey powder or whatever. Nothing else. Must be as close as you can get to protein. You guys are going to have 500 calories of pure fat. And then see what happens in terms of blood glucose response, insulin response, and whatever. And then just to make sure you haven't lucked out and got people who respond well in each group, you then repeat the experiment with a washout period and put the sugar people onto protein and the protein people onto fat and the fat people onto sugar, and then do it again. And then you would be able to say, you'd have really powerful results then to say, fat has no impact on blood glucose.
Right.
Sugar does.
Yeah.
Protein doesn't have an impact on blood glucose, but it does have an impact on insulin. Those are the kind of things that I would expect. But you should go in open-minded to say, let's see what the evidence tells us, because it might be that fat does have an impact on insulin. Particular fats do. You don't know what you're going to find if you go in genuinely doing research.
So one of the things that it occurred to us when we first heard about the Pure study, you talk about this Bradford Hill standard of causation and the level of the observed effect, and that it really has to be a 200 plus. And I think Nina mentioned that for pharmaceutical interventions in the US, it has to be 400 to 500% observation before they can start doing randomized controlled clinical trials. But the thing that occurred to me is that for 20, 30, 40 years, T.H. Chan's school at Harvard, as you say, have been torturing the same data over and over again to pull out these slight associations that are wispy thin and really don't meet the Bradford Hill standard. If we, as the low-carb people, were to jump on the Pure study and say, see, carbs are bad for you because this associational study with weak inferences was able to show that, we'd be hoist by our own petard, I suspect, because these epidemiological studies, by actually going out and saying, well, this study says that carbs are bad for you, but the association is so small, we're going to reject it outright, even though it meets our biases. I suspect that that's a more powerful statement than anything else we can say about the Pure study.
You're so right on the double standards. I mean, I do think we were very restrained, actually, because we've got a lot of scientists on our side who know that epidemiology is flawed, can't, definitively say anything about causation. We know about how to calculate absolute and relative risks. What I do observe sometimes in studies, and I've seen Dr. Aseem Malhotra talk about this in some of his presentations as well, is the number of times that you'll see absolute and relative risk used when it suits people. If you keep an eye out for it, you'll find this is so disingenuous. So you'll see, that you might find, because people are trying to back up their own belief system the whole time, support the dietary guidelines, support, drugs. Asim has spotted it with some drugs that they'll present the benefit in terms of relative risk and the side effects in terms of absolute risk. Now, how outrageous is that?
That is outrageous.
Classically with statins, they'll say, this is so classic with statins. Look at any statin study. And the headline will be, take a statin and, you'll experience a 28% reduction in, cardiovascular incidence or whatever they think it is, over a 5-year period, whatever they can stretch out.
Right.
And, 1 in 200 people experience, which is immediately into your absolute risk. Experienced, negligible side effects or that kind of thing. And you just think, guys, this is so outrageous. How do you get away? How does that get through peer review? If I peer reviewed that, I would red circle that like crazy and say, use the same one for both. I don't mind which you use. I'd prefer absolute risk for both. But if you want to go relative for both, that's fine. But just be consistent.
So I have an answer for you. To quote Tom Naughton in the movie Fathead, follow the money.
Yeah, you got to follow the money on this. I mean, seriously, when you see, how lucrative statins are, and then, of course, these son of statins, as Malcolm calls them, these PCSK9s that disrupt... Yeah, they disrupt a different pathway in the body. Whippy-do. We found another natural, God or nature-given mechanism, whatever your belief system, that we now think we know better than, and we now want to disrupt and impair and intervene with. Crikey, God, how many more of these are we going to find before we seriously harm human beings even more than we are already? A couple of unique things about the Pure study that I think beat other epidemiological studies, particularly the stuff that's just coming out of Harvard all the time. Number one, the fact that they did look at all-cause mortality, which I think has to be the gold standard.
Right.
If
hard endpoints.
Yeah, and if you're going to say, eat lentils and you'll die less of heart disease, then what happened to cancer? Because if I'm going to die 10% less likely from heart disease, but 1,000% more likely by cancer. I'm sorry, I don't want to eat lentils.
That's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, I'm concerned about, am I going to die or am I not going to die?
Right.
And yes, I am concerned, am I going to get cancer or am I not going to get cancer? But you've got to put it in the context of, you've got to do the mortality first, which is what the Pure study did. So they did the all-cause mortality, and they also then looked at other factors like cardiovascular disease and other, baddies that you don't want to get. So that was really good. Big plus on that one. And the second one that was really good was obviously the diversity of the populations studied, because they were studying across 5 continents. I think it was 18 different countries.
Right.
You had Middle Eastern countries, African countries, as well as, affluent, Canada, America kind of countries, different populations in all of those countries. You don't get that with the Harvard stuff that's being churned out. You've either got American nurses, women, or American health professionals, men.
Right. It sort of rules out any kind of genetic or environmental ideas.
It's so important. The fact that we can now look at, dietary fat across the board, whether you're consuming dietary fat in Africa or dietary fat in China or in Canada, that's really powerful. That's really interesting. I might have some notes to hand here, actually, because I just pulled out some interesting things when I looked at the studies. This was obviously one of the things that I did blog on. So, for example, Europe and North America was the region with the most people in the high activity category. So 59% of people in Europe and North America that were studied were in the high activity category. Contrast that with Malaysia and Southeast Asia was at 30%. I mean, that's half. And you might think, Southeast Asia.
That's surprising.
Yeah, you might think, people will still be doing more farming work, more walking to work. There's much more activity going on in, dare I say, the less healthy, more obese nations of Europe and North America. Africa had, of course, the highest percentage of smokers at 30%. Europe and North America had the lowest at an average of 15%. This was my most striking finding.
Did that include France? Sorry.
The French.
The French smoke like crazy, don't they?
Yeah, the French do smoke a lot, but, I guess they get averaged out
They're protected by all the saturated fat.
Yeah, they're protected by saturated fat, but, across Europe, they get averaged out by Scandinavia, which really doesn't smoke very much at all. Britain's got a lot better, particularly since the smoking ban.
Yeah.
They can't, one country can't, they can't bring it down. Anyway, I love this one. The most striking difference was that 61% of Europeans and North Americans had education beyond secondary school, because we know that there's a big association between the level of someone's education and their health. This is now going into things like health inequalities, compared to just 2.6% of Africans. 61 versus 3%.
Wow.
In secondary education. So, you look at health inequalities, we can look in the UK and say, we can see our most deprived areas. They might be Glasgow, they might be the Welsh Valleys, they might be the northeast of England. And we see that they're less educated and they have lower life expectancy, they have lower healthy years lived. They access the healthcare system far more often. We know that there's a massive connection between health and affluence, privilege, education, where you were born, how you were born, opportunities that were afforded to you in your first 25 years. But we can now see globally the impact that developed versus less developed status has for those populations. I love that stuff. There were so many great numbers in that study.
So, Zoe, is that relative education? So, in the case of Wales and Glasgow and northeast of England, that these are populations that have less education compared to the rest of the nation that they're in.
Yes.
But most other things are a like-for-like comparison. But does that actually apply to nations where where 97% of people don't have secondary education?
So is it what you're saying that, because one of the measures of education, they look at sort of, what was the highest education that people attained, basically? So was it sort of, PhD, masters, really further education? Was it degree, which is further education? Was it sort of staying on to do what we call A-levels, sort of secondary education? Or do you stop at 16 in the sort of developed nations? So that's the usual measure in epidemiological studies when they look at, let's compare the education levels of different people. The reason they look at all of this is because they adjust for it. Because, and this is why, so when you're doing the randomized controlled trial, or if you're looking at population data and you're grouping it into, let's say, people who developed heart disease and people who didn't develop heart disease, then when you put them all, there's always like table one in every paper. I love table one. Table one is always the characteristics of the population. And you glance across table one, and what it tells you is, oh, look, the people who got heart disease smoked more, did less exercise, had a higher BMI, had lower education levels, tended to be older.
All these factors.
It jumps out at you.
It just jumps out at you. It massively jumps out at you. So the challenge then for the researchers, because they know all of those are those confounding variables, they have to adjust for all of them in some way. And I don't know statistically exactly how they do it, but you have to trust that as well as they possibly can, they've ironed out the impact of smoking, drinking, not exercising, having a high BMI, being older, and all the rest of it. You have to trust that at some level they've ironed all of that out so that when they're showing you the people that ate lentils had 30%, less heart disease or whatever, that they have allowed for all of that other stuff.
Right.
But what they then haven't done in any dietary study is allowed for all the stuff that the person that eats lentils eats.
Right.
Because it then gets too complicated.
Sure.
So this is what I always say with the fruit and veg studies. So when they come out and say, oh, look, people who eat fruit and veg die less often of cancer. Then you say, okay, so people who eat fruit and veg don't drink Coca-Cola, don't snack on popcorn in the evening. As
we all know, health is probably more affected by what you don't eat than what you do eat.
Exactly. So if I see somebody having 7 portions of fruit and vegetables a day, that tells me that it's an educated, yummy mummy, probably in Kensington and Chelsea. I joked in one blog, they have children called Tarquin and Jemima. If I then see the group of people who in the past 7 days have not eaten a single piece of fruit and veg, I know that they're from the Welsh Valleys or Glasgow. And I know that they're fourth generation unemployed. And I know that they smoke and they don't exercise and they watch Jeremy Kyle reality TV all day long. And I have a clear image in my mind of those two people.
Yeah.
And yet this headline in the newspaper is trying to tell me that the 7 fruit and veg a day is what made the difference between the woman in Kensington and the, 60-year-old man in the valleys. I mean, give me a break. It's a lifestyle measure. It's not, if you really want to test it, you do a randomized controlled trial. You go into the valleys and you give them all 7 pieces of fruit and veg a day and say, change nothing else.
If it changes.
Yeah.
Change nothing else. All you do is have the fruit on top of everything else that you're doing that's unhealthy.
Right.
And then tell me that they're going to die 25% less often of heart disease in the next 5 years. No.
That's a bit crazy.
Yeah. That's a perfect example of using an epidemiological study as a hypothesis-generating activity.
Absolutely.
We've got the hypothesis. We see that people who eat 7 veg or whatever are more healthy. So now we're going to go back in with this hypothesis. We're going to test it with a randomized clinical trial. And that's the only point where you actually have meaningful, actionable information, I suspect.
Yeah.
You were reading from your blog. Can you tell us a bit about your blog online and what we can find up there?
I've been blogging probably since about 2009. And I can't remember exactly when it became weekly, but it just sort of seems to have become weekly. And I managed to keep it going even during my PhD, which I look back now and I don't know how I did it.
Yeah.
Because I'm not working on my PhD now and I still don't seem to have enough time to do anywhere near anything that I want to do.
Right.
I just don't know how I did it. But I blog every week. I try and pick something that's really topical in the news. I get great ideas from my club members. I get ideas from Twitter. People might say, hey, what do you think of this? Sometimes they're interesting. Some just jump out of you. Like the Pure study is so huge globally. You're going to do it the next week. The Lancet Type 2 Diabetes in Remission came out just before Christmas. Huge. The Australian Kellogg's study that was funded by Kellogg's. If you eat Kellogg's, everything's going to be marvellous and all the rest of it. I had to do that one.
The phytosterol wheat Bix one.
All of that stuff. Yeah. So,
so you basically take the stuff that people are claiming and pick it apart.
I look at it. I love numbers. I love logic. I love dissecting it. I try and do it in a couple of thousand words. I try to make it as readable as possible. It's kind of like, here's the key messages. Here's what they found interesting. Here's what I found interesting, which might not be what they found interesting. Kind of like the type 2 study. Yes, it tells us you can put it in remission, but it also tells us that what we're doing at the moment is horrific.
Right.
So we need to change what we're doing at the moment. So, I kind of like to think I look at it in different ways. There's some people who enjoy it and have been enjoying it for a while. I guess it's how I became known to Professor Tim Noakes, because he wanted me to take apart that study that was so key in his trial. I just like dissecting things. I've got one of those sort of anal maths brains that just sees a number and I have to know where it's come from. So I don't read the words in the paper. I hardly ever read the words unless I need to find out what they think happened.
Yeah.
I just go for the tables and I go for the numbers and they tell you everything. I put as much as I can on OpenView. I'd love to put it all on OpenView, but I'm not a doctor like so many in the low carb field. I'm not a academic. I'm not part of any university anymore. I wasn't a part of a university when I was a student. I was a student. I wasn't a lecturer or anything. So, if you want to put Welsh lamb and Welsh free-range beef on the table with the frequency that we would like to do, I've got to make a living some way.
Sure.
So I've said if I win the lottery, I'll put them all on OpenView. But until then, I'm sorry. It's not a big charge. I think it's like £1 a week or something. And
oh, nice.
It's well worth it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Worth
I hope so. I mean, I really hope so. And people get to, make suggestions. Some of my best studies have come from people saying, hey, have you seen this one?
Right.
So there was one just before Christmas where somebody wrote to me and said, I've seen, in fact, I think it was an Australian dietitian who quoted it in a blog and said, oh, look, low carb people die, basically. Like it came from a 20...
Hey, everybody dies.
Yeah, everyone dies. It came from a 2014 study where these researchers had claimed an association between low carb diets and high mortality. And she said, I wouldn't mention it because it was a few years ago, but this dietitian has basically just glibly put it in her blog with a one-liner of, oh, look, eat low carb and die. So she said, oh, please, can you, come back on it? So I had to. It's like a red rag to a bull. I just had to do it. and that proved to be really funny.
Yeah.
You can usually find something wrong with studies. That's what's really interesting as well.
Right.
I do peer reviews, not too much because it takes a lot of time. It's a real responsibility.
And you're perfectly willing to be a witness at any doctor's trial who gets sued for quote unquote malpractice by recommending a low carb diet, maybe.
Yeah, I probably would be. I mean, I did it for Tim because I love Tim and I admire him so much, and he was right, and it just had to be done.
Yeah, we all do.
Yeah.
Would you ever choose to go through that again? I don't think Tim would ever choose to go through it again. I don't think Nina Teicholz, Dr. Karen Zinn from New Zealand, and we were the three. I coined the phrase in an email, oh, look, we're Tim's angels, like Charlie's angels. And it just stuck. And forever since then, we've been known as Tim's angels. And I used it in a presentation once, and I actually put the picture of us up, like the Charlie's angels. Yeah. You were there, of course, yeah.
Will you have the correct diversity of hair colours?
We did,
It
yeah.
actually works out quite well.
Yeah. Fake, of course, in my case. But yeah, no, we did.
You're not supposed to mention that.
You didn't need to say that.
I think I said this in the Breckenridge thing, actually. It was Dolly Parton that said, I'm not dumb and I'm not blonde. Which I thought was great. We can all be blonde if we want to be. Whatever, I leave it to my hairdresser. But yeah, I mean, I remember on the mornings of, I was probably in the worst position because I kind of got out there first and I knew I was on after Tim. And we had no idea when they were going to finish with Tim. So, I arrived Tuesday morning, you're not needed. Wednesday morning, you're not needed. Thursday morning, not needed. Friday, finally got on the stand at about 3:00 in the afternoon. So, you're on day 4 of complete cortisol burnout.
Right.
You were ready.
Yeah, your fight and flight is definitely on in top gear. You're ready to attack, defend, do whatever you want to do.
Let me tell you, Zoe came out fight. She didn't come out flighting.
Yeah, but you've got to do it in a nice way as well because, the panel are judging you. So you don't want to row. You don't want to get angry. You can be passionate, but you've got to be really calm. And they're just trying to wind you up.
Sure.
And, I just didn't get wound up. I was really impressed with myself, actually, because I can get wound up. I can get wound up watching England and Wales play rugby.
I have the same problem.
Exactly,
I have the same problem. Usually the Wallabies are involved.
No, exactly, yeah. Well, God, Wales-Australia rugby is even more stressful. But
and I have a problem with the Red Sox. I'm like,
different game. Don't understand it.
Well, Zoe, it's been such a delight to be here in your home. The beef stew was wonderful, and
Thank
Andy's
you.
been great. And
beef stew was Andy's. Andy did a good job with the beef stew.
Good job on that stew, bub.
Yeah, you've done good. He's laughing in the background.
All right. Well, thanks again. And
pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's been a real joy. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Heard you say you're due for a little.
Well, thank you, Zoe Harcombe. That was wonderful.
Yeah, thanks, Zoe.
We have to loop back with her. We've got some new laws, regulations, and things happening in the world of science, and we're going to definitely have her on again to talk about that.
Yeah.
Well, are you hungry?
I'm a little bit hungry.
I'm a little peckish.
I think it's time for some
Recipes. All right, I'm going to go first this week.
You go first.
So, as you probably know, this is tapas time for us. We're dedicating a year to small plates.
Yeah.
And I feel like I cheated a little bit because what I did is it fits within the tapas sort of flavor profile of Spanish food. But you could easily serve it as a main dish if you just increase the portion, right? It's lamb with tomatoes, olives, and garlic.
Oh, that's actually a good Australia Day fare.
Oh, all right.
So anything with lamb is good for Australia Day. So
yeah, sure.
So Australian tapas.
Yeah, we'll get to that one. Anyway, so you start with a boneless leg of lamb, about 3 pounds. Mm-hmm. You're going to need a lemon because you're going to zest the whole thing and take the juice from half of it. And lemon juice in this is just ridiculously good.
Yeah.
Maybe a quarter of a pound of assorted olives. Maybe 8 to 10 to a dozen grape tomatoes or cherry tomatoes, whichever you like. What about 10 cloves of garlic crushed up? You need about 4 sprigs of rosemary, fresh rosemary, removed from the stems, just the leaves. About a half a cup of olive oil, extra virgin, of course. A half a stick of butter, which is a quarter cup. And about 2 teaspoons of xanthan gum.
Now, this is going to make more than just a plate of tapas, isn't it?
You're going to make little dishes that you can serve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
So you want to dry the lamb thoroughly with paper towels and score the fat in a cross pattern. And we're going to use an Instapot or a pressure cooker.
Nice.
And in the bottom, I'm going to put olive oil and a teaspoon of salt and a few grinds of black pepper. And you're going to place the lamb in fat side down.
Right.
Yeah. And then you cover it with all the remaining ingredients. And you sprinkle some more olive oil, salt, and pepper on top. And now you're just going to essentially push the button to turn it on the high meat setting. To turn it on the meat setting for about 15 minutes. Now, I've talked about this technique before. One of the things with Instapots is they tend to amass liquid when you're cooking meats and things.
Yeah.
So it's nice to take some of that liquid out so that can get a little bit more crisp. So you're going to cook it on high for 15 minutes and then release the pressure. You strain out the liquid and set it aside. And you're going to cook it for another 45 minutes to an hour on high as well. Take the liquid out of there and add that to the pan again. And now you've got this strained liquid in a pan. And you're going to not turn on the heat. You're going to just let it rest. Let it be warm. And sprinkle in the xanthan gum and whisk it in, right? Until it's all combined. If it's too hot, it's going to turn into clumps. So now you add the butter and you bring it up to a boil while you're whisking. And that's going to thicken it right up. Now you just want to remove that from the heat and add salt and pepper to taste if you need any more salt and pepper. So now you remove the lamb and let that rest, which you probably could have done while you were making the gravy. But the key is to cut it in bite-sized chunks. And this is keto tapas, so you want to make sure there's some fat on every bite.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And now to serve this, just take a little dish and place a bit of the sauce in the bottom of it. Add a few bites of the lamb and some of the olive mixture and serve it immediately. So you just want it in a little ramekin, like I did the meatballs, or a small dish. And, it's also really good if you want to have it as an entree, but it's a great starter. The lemon just brings out the flavor, and it's, delicious.
The thing I like about this recipe is that you could actually put the chunks in a bag and freeze it with a little bit of that fatty sauce.
Yeah.
And if you had a family of 4, for example, you could put a family's worth of tapas for this lamb in a freezer bag, freeze it, and the next time you have tapas and you've got 3 meals in the tapas and you really think, I could just add one more, just go to the freezer, pull out the lamb, chuck it in the microwave.
There you go.
Reconstitute the sauce, and there you go. So, wonderful meal.
Yep.
Really
So
good.
I basically cooked this, and since nobody else in my house liked lamb or liked it or wanted to eat it, I got to live on this for an entire week.
Oh, nice.
It was great. So great.
Yeah.
So what's your recipe, Richard?
So 2 weeks ago, I mentioned that I had a churros recipe.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Con chocolate. Yeah. Well, instead I did a roasted almonds.
Yeah,
So last week, however, I said I had a churros con chocolate recipe.
That's right.
But I sort of went with my manchego and jamon and an olive for my tapas.
So we're finally going to get some churros today?
Well, actually, no. I have another recipe that some of the girls on Facebook have insisted that I do first. So maybe churros for next week.
All right.
This recipe this week is queso croquetas, which is cheese croquettes or deep-fried cheesy balls.
Cheesy balls. Now, I want to say, first of all, that a few shows ago, I did ham and cheese croquettes.
Yeah.
And I wasn't all that thrilled with how they turned out, so I'm definitely going to try yours, which are just cheese.
Yeah, they're just cheese. Now, this recipe actually comes from Julie's dad, and he used to be a professional chef. He was a chef at Claridge's, which is a fancy restaurant in London, and what they did with this recipe was they used a bechamel, which is a sauce you make from a roux. So you get flour and butter, and you brown the flour in hot frying butter, and then you add milk to that, and then to that recipe, that makes it like a milky, creamy sauce, and then to that recipe they add a lot of cheese until it becomes solid enough to make into these cheesy balls, and then they deep fry them after breading them with breadcrumbs. So that's the recipe. Now, that obviously a whole bunch of things that you can't have on keto. Can't have flour. You shouldn't have flour. Shouldn't have milk. Shouldn't have breadcrumbs. But I decided what I would do is I would use my cheese sauce recipe, which uses the magical ingredient of trisodium citrate, and make up some cheesy balls, and they worked really well. They look wonderful. So this recipe is queso croquetas, which is deep-fried cheesy balls.
All right.
First of all, I blend up some pork rinds that we're going to use for the breading, and I use roughly 25 grams of pork rinds to make 2 cheesy balls.
Okay. I like the way you say that, by the way. Isn't there a drinking game going on? There's some people listening to this.
Every time I say the word balls, they take a shot.
All right. Let's get him really drunk, Richard.
Let's get
balls,
him
balls, 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 balls.
Indeed. So I've got my pork rinds there already for my breading, and I'm going to crack an egg and mix it up, and that egg is going to be used for the wash. So I'm going to make these cheesy balls and then dip them in the egg, and then roll them in the breadcrumbs, and then dip them in the egg again, roll them in the breadcrumbs, and chuck them in the deep fryer, and they come out really looking good. Anyway, so to make the cheesy balls, I start off with about 75 grams of grated cheese, and this makes 2 cheesy balls.
Okay.
And to that 75 grams of grated cheese, I add about a teaspoon of sodium citrate. Now, this is it's a salt, really, and it tastes salty. And what it does is it allows cheese to emulsify with water. And so to that 75 grams of cheese and the sodium citrate, I add 15 mils of boiling water, and I throw it in the microwave until it melts, which is roughly 90 seconds. I put it in for a minute, take it out, put a spoon in, mix it around, see if there's any bits that haven't melted, put it in for another 30 seconds. Yeah. Now I take it out, and what we've got here is we've got melted cheese, and there's a little bit of water floating on it, and the sodium tricitrate. Now what we do is we're going to blend it, and the sodium tricitrate will enable the cheese to emulsify perfectly throughout the water. Yeah. And what you end up with then, after you've microwaved it and then you've blended it, is you end up with a fairly solid feeling cheese sauce. Right. And so what I do is I put it in a bit of cling film and throw it in the fridge to let it become more solid. And once I can cut it and cut it into 2 portions, then I'm going to form it with my hands into balls. And so I use the warmth after I've chilled it in the fridge a bit. I use the warmth of my hands to be able to mold the cheesy balls into shape. And then I put it into a ball mold, which is actually a mold used for making ice cubes for whiskey, but it's perfect size. But you don't have to have if you don't have a ball mold, just put it in a bit of cling film. Sure. Tie the cling film up with a rubber band and hang it, and it'll be perfectly ball shaped. And it's going to go in the freezer for maybe 10, 15 minutes. It's just enough to be able to make sure that you're going to be able to coat it with the breadcrumbs and then deep fry it. And so when you do that, obviously coating it with the breadcrumbs made from pork rinds, I deep fry it in tallow. I use a grass-fed tallow that we can just buy from our regular supermarkets here,
Great.
which is awesome.
Great.
And so the balls split a little bit where they touch the basket of the fryer. So I put that bit on the bottom. So when I'm plating, I put the nice bit on top so they look perfect.
Awesome.
But a little bit of cheese oozing out of the bottom is just no problem. And so that is my recipe for deep fried cheesy balls.
That's pretty good, man. I'm going to have to make those.
Yeah.
Do you put anything on top, like a little dollop of aioli and a little pepper or something? Or you just
you
like
can
them where they
actually
are?
do that. Yeah, so what we do sometimes when we do a tapas meal is that we might have a little bowl of mayonnaise on the side and we'll add a little bit of horseradish to it.
Yeah.
And the horseradish to the mayonnaise adds a little bit of sort of spicy flavour to it that gets to the back of the sinuses, and on the cheesy balls is just delicious. So
fantastic.
Dunk a cheesy ball into some of that delicious
Somebody
mayonnaise.
has drank a lot of shots listening to this, and we're sorry.
Next week, I promise some churros.
That's what you said last week. And
the week before.
Well, that's a show, I guess, buddy.
Yeah, I think it is. Of course, if you have anything you want to tell us, something we said wrong, something you don't agree with, some more research that you found to support or refute anything that we've said, send it by email to dudes@2ketodudes.com or post it on our website.
And you can follow us on Twitter at 2KetoDudes, on Instagram at 2KetoDudes, and make sure to use the hashtag 2KetoDudes.
And of course, if you want to join the free ketogenic forum, it's forum.2keto.com.
And if useless swag is your fancy, t-shirts, coffee mugs, and other junk with witty keto sayings on them, head over to gear.2keto.com.
And if you want a shot at getting some of that swag for free, join the 2 Keto Dudes fan club. You'll be eligible to win something in every show. Go to fanclub.2keto.com.
And if you feel like supporting our podcasts and our forums, think about making a pledge on our Patreon page at patreon.2keto.com.
Or just hit the donate button on our website at www.2ketodudes.com, or just go to donate.2keto.com.
You can also see all of our podcasts and other videos on YouTube at youtube.2keto.com.
And if you haven't already, go leave us a review on iTunes. That's how new people get to know about what we do.
2 Keto Dudes is brought to you by 2 Keto LLC, who strives to support the low-carb community with podcasts and other publications. Keep calm and keto on, Richard.
Yeah, keep calm and keto on, Carl.
All right, and we'll see you next time on 2 Keto Dudes.